All right, welcome everyone. We're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we're here for podcast number
13.
13. Thank you for that.
Yes.
All right, and we're talking about the
power of short stories. Yeah.
Yes. And short stories in themselves are great.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into those, let's do some announcements.
Before we do
quick.
that. So,
yes.
Now.
So we've just started Death Parade.
Exactly. So, should
Woo-hoo.
be able to see that.
Thank you, patrons.
Right now.
New time slot and show slot in particular.
Yes.
Giving us the ability to do that.
Right.
So thank you very much. Of course, shout out to an awesome Patreon member, Frosted Seal, aka Matthew on
this guy's
Discord.
awesome.
Very awesome. Shout out to you, dude. You're the best. Thank you so much for your support.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we just have our usual schedule of shows.
Right. Schedule's normal. Tuesday, Hunter x Hunter. Mm-hmm. Wednesday, Psychopaths. Thursday, Hunter x Hunter again.
Yep.
Friday, My Hero Academia. Saturday, JoJo's and Ruby, with Ruby being in the earlier part of the day, and then JoJo's, being a couple hours after that.
Right.
And then Haikyuu on Sunday.
Yep. And also, as we come up on the end of Psychopaths, soon we're going to let you know that the show we're going to be doing after that, once Psychopaths finishes, and you can kind of do the math of which episode it's going to be in at least a few weeks or so, will be Made in Abyss.
Right. That one came in second.
It was the second place
on the poll.
winner on the poll recently.
Right.
So, hype for that show.
We've heard a lot of good things about it.
Yeah. Jacob and I in particular are very excited for the explorative type mystery show.
Yeah.
There's a big hole. We're going to find out what's in the hole. Sounds great.
Yep.
Love it. Good fantasy stuff as well.
Oh, yeah.
But with talking about short stories, let's get into it.
Right.
One of the things I just wanted to make mention really quickly is if you watched a story or watched a movie or a show or read a book or anything, and you can tell that there's this sense of urgency in the storytelling.
Absolutely.
Where they don't feel the necessary bit to leave things open because this could be all the story you get.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like,
they don't hold back.
They don't hold back.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we're missing out on a lot nowadays is the idea of getting the tightly woven, succinct, efficient short story with no sequel baiting. It's almost a thing that we've come to just expect nowadays because people don't want to experiment with a new
and that means certain things can't really be done in these stories because it's the idea that it has to be able to keep on going. Right. So certain characters can't be killed off, and a lot of times you just don't end up getting those climaxes because it can't really end.
It can't really end. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I feel like is missing from storytelling in general is the idea that you can tell a satisfying ending and still potentially have a sequel done later. There's a lot of stories that have examples of this where even like Star Wars, for instance, A New Hope had a very satisfying ending. In fact, it wasn't called A New Hope back then.
It was just called Star Wars. Yeah.
And then eventually they're like, you know what? This was very successful. Let's do a sequel. And you know what? Because I think they were willing to tell individual stories at that point, The Empire Strikes Back became one of the best sequels of all time.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny that, we're talking about short stories now when sequels is our previous podcast. But what are some of your favorite things about short stories?
So short stories, like... in longer stories, one of the things that you can do is you can have this idea of the slow burn, the development, the anticipation, right? And that can be absolutely fantastic. I love it when you're able to have more of like those lingering moments and things like that.
Right.
But with short stories, what they do is they basically say, okay, we're going to have every second basically be used effectively. Yeah. And if they do, and that means if they do have those lingering moments, they're way more noticeable. There's this idea that they are respecting your time, and they're saying, hey, we're going to make this awesome story, but we're going to tell it in as short a space as possible.
Yes.
And that is very, very hard to do. It's
not
way
easy.
easier to make a longer story than to make a short story because, you have to fine-tune every little aspect of it.
Definitely.
And it can be a real treat when you get a good short story. But the thing is, it doesn't necessarily have to be contained to the traditional idea of a story.
Yes.
You can go from something like a movie that's a lot shorter than a show to like a miniseries all the way down to like an AMV
or a poem
or just a picture.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite stories, for those of you that have seen Soul Eater, it's from the second opening when it shows Soul and he's holding Maka in his arms. She's not moving. and he just wails. Never happened in the actual show. I was very disappointed. But that alone, that picture, I saw it in some AMV, and it actually made me go watch the show.
Right.
Because I was just like, there's so much there's so much information there that can be inferred and, that's implied.
Exactly. It's touching upon your imagination.
Exactly.
One of the things that's interesting about short stories in particular is they'll either rely on your imagination to infer other aspects within the story because they respect you as the viewer to be actually thinking and engaging your brain while the story is going on. But also, in another way, they actually make specific effort to cram as much good stuff into every second as possible, so that while you're getting maybe exposition, you're also getting some visual storytelling.
Sure.
You're also getting some other things that are going in parallel with this. You're getting maybe some facial expressions that convey a little bit more of what a character is thinking while they're expositing, basically. And it's that efficiency where you then go, oh, they don't necessarily have to have imagination in for everything. They can just go, okay, we only have 5 minutes to do this scene. What is the most good info that we can put into this that basically so nothing is wasted.
Right.
I feel like what happens in longer stories is they get that free reign to kind of pad the story a little bit. And it's okay to, I'd say, have pregnant pauses where it's you have that,
those can
that
be
pause
awesome.
of time where there's more nuanced kind of aspects.
And that engages the imagination too, because it's something where you can fill in the blanks.
Right.
But a lot of times you tend to sort of use those a bit more than you need
a
to.
bit leisurely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you have a tight shorter story, you don't have that luxury. So it actually has you use the time more effectively.
Yeah.
There's a couple stories in particular that we'll end up bringing up that have that bit where you can tell that if they had 5 more minutes, they might have been able to tell a slightly better story, but they didn't. So they end up telling a very good story for it being, say, 22 minutes or something like that.
And it's because it's the idea that you can still have very dense, well-used periods of time in longer stories.
Right.
But they're not forced to do that.
Yes.
And if come on, this is just for all of us. If we're not forced to do something, we at the very least won't do it all the time, right?
Right. One of the unfortunate things with writing and storytelling and just that whole thing in general is there's a lot of moments where you can see that someone is taking the path of least resistance just to kind of give out a story, especially when it's a quota that's being met. And we've seen that a lot in anime in particular, where things go long running and some shonen just has a quota to be met, and the story will get pumped out, and
that's
corners
just
will be
how
cut
it
in other
is.
areas. Yeah, that's how it is.
And sometimes they can also do it because they're not wanting to draw attention to that. A lot of times this will be done in coming of age sort of stories where the parents will just be absent. Sometimes it's a glaring problem, but a lot of times they're just doing it. They'll come up with some excuse or something because they're not wanting to focus on the parents. They're wanting to focus on the kid and how they come to terms with growing up and all that. One of my absolute favorite examples of concise storytelling is Little Witch Academia, the movie, the first 25-minute film.
And you're not going to do spoilers, right?
No, I'm not. Because he hasn't seen it.
I haven't seen it yet.
But I absolutely love it because they're very much setting it up for they want to turn this into something bigger. But since they knew that they just had the 25 minutes, they if you go through that, every little bit is used to just the utmost effectiveness. Multiple characters and making sure they introduce them all very quickly, having little bits of progression for different characters all in the same 25 minutes. It's things like that where with say a TV show, most of the time I would say even the longer that it goes, the better story that you can have overall, because you just have more time. But a lot of times the specific individual episode quality
degrades,
kind of goes down.
I agree. There were a couple stories that I remember in particular where the beginning individual story for the premiere of Lost in particular, it would have this very captivating immediate story, and it didn't just have a hook. like it had a mini conclusion to it that left itself open to new questions and stuff with the guys, where are we?
Right.
But the idea that tightly woven story introduced us to, around a dozen characters.
Right.
And when you basically have that, I call it urgency, but I would say limitations is also a good way to look at it as well. When you have those put upon limitations, where you say, I don't have more than 50 pages. I don't have more than, 5 hours to tell a very compelling, multidimensional story. You go, okay, I know I can't do this type of story.
Right.
I have to tell a more simple story.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go hardcore on the execution of that simple story.
Yep. Yeah.
I think that's where it comes to be important. You'll see a lot of stories that will go for style or substance, but the reason why they choose one or the other is actually because they have the freedom to choose.
Right.
Some of them, the stories are so short, you don't have any other options.
Exactly.
You have to do one or the other.
Yep.
And it's like, once you do that one, you don't have the other, really.
Right. And
that's where something like Space Patrol Luluco has
Sure.
all the style.
Yes.
And very little like substance to it. It's very kind of silly and stuff.
Yeah,
and fun and goofy.
But
it's still
I
great
love it.
storytelling.
One of the things that, so you might have noticed this, but like for me, I know that when I go to a story and I'm like wanting to find some new story, a lot of times it depends on the mood I'm in, right?
Yeah.
And there will be specific moods for specific types of things and stuff. And when you have a large story, it is more generally appealing because it can it can appeal to a wide
variety of moods.
Yeah, variety of moods, right. I can't think right now. But with a short story, because it's so much smaller, what will end up happening, usually, hopefully, is that unless there's something like Bacchanal,
which I'm about to talk about.
Because Bacchanal just breaks the rules, they'll focus on a specific mood. And you'll end up getting something like Madoka Magica, or, you can do a lot of different things when you're deciding, all right, we know exactly the kind of story we're going to tell.
Right.
And we're going to tell just that story and no other story.
Exactly.
And it can be so amazing when it's done well.
Yep. So I'm going to talk about Bacchanal right now. Because I feel like as far as short shows go, Bacchanal is top tier.
Yeah.
It's not really beaten by anything, obviously. There's a lot of ones that I would say are contenders, and Bacchanal might not be better than some of them, but Bacchanal is a clear winner to me in many other ways by being the short 12-episode... Is it 12 or 13?
13 and then 3 OVAs, but yeah.
Yeah, but I don't count the OVAs. So 13 episodes. You get a story that is probably the most ambitious short story you'll ever experience.
It is ridiculous.
And it's actually crazy because one of the things that I've heard from a lot of people when they talk about short shows, specifically in anime, there's an aspect where they go, it has that one thing it does. It has that one thing it does really well.
Right.
And the thing is, it's not that it does the one thing. It's more that it's known for the one thing.
Sure.
But when you talk about Bacchanal, it breaks all the rules. It has all the things that could be in a longer show, like, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood or something with 65 episodes. But instead, they take the complexity of something and condense it into 13 episodes and give you something that
is one wild ride.
It's wild. I would say wild is, that's a great way to put it.
Ugh.
But you feel the urgency of the 13-episode show. Once it gets into maybe like the second episode, you're moving already at a breakneck pace towards something that's just like, where's this train going? No pun intended. And once it ends at the station, at the track, so to speak, you feel like you've gone on a much longer, larger journey than you actually did.
Yep.
And I have nothing against longer shows, but I have to agree with Jacob. When you have a story that doesn't need to be that long, to be a respectful author or creator to your audience and go, this doesn't need to be there. One of the shows that we actually just watched recently had an example of an episode that just did not need to be there.
Right.
It was an example of basically padding for building up for a future season.
Right.
And it's just like, why is this here?
Yeah.
It wasn't a long show by any means. But
And,
it's the idea
that episode wasn't necessarily a bad episode, but it just didn't belong.
Yeah, it's the example of where you you're padding essentially.
Right. Like if I go to say watch, I don't know, like Toradora, right?
Yeah.
I am not going to want to see like some crazy mystery or whatever. No, I'm there for the rom-com, right? And that's what I'm looking for.
Right.
If I'm watching Madoka Magica,
you're there for the intensity.
I don't want slice of life. Like
it's a dark slice of life, you know.
But so it's one of these things where when you go to a short story, assuming it's a good short story,
right,
it's so easy to basically hit the audience's expectations.
Yes.
Because you can set it up for it and it doesn't change.
Right. It's not about saying that it's, you know, it's just a moderate story and
right.
that it doesn't exceed their expectations, but the idea that you're not going to contradict their expectations.
Yes. And that's such a special thing when it happens, and unfortunately it doesn't happen nearly enough.
Right. I think what does end up happening is there's this idea that the show itself is evolving as people figure out what the vision for the story actually is. One of the things that kind of goes against this in some ways is when you watch something that's really short, like a 5-minute story, like you said, like an AMV, or something like Shelter that we saw a couple of years ago. When Shelter came out, it really took the internet by storm, not because it had the song just attached to it,
but because
it had the story attached to it. And the story itself is very simple.
Very simple.
Very simple.
You don't need to do something complicated with a short story. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just enough to express an emotion.
Right. And that emotion, that very specific, maybe even sequence of feelings, maybe like 2 or 3 emotions that you see in Shelter, get communicated so perfectly that it just captivates you in that specific moment. Right. And oftentimes what big stories do is they try to take those moments and spread them out amongst kind of padded filler story for the purpose of giving you kind of a nice, good little steady hit, so to speak, and that good moment drug. You're just right there.
That is an example of it done poorly, but it can also be done well if you have a bunch of different stories going along at the same time.
Yes.
That way you basically they're saying they're not capitalizing on you being in the mood for that one story. They're saying we'll give you that one because we know you'll like it. We're going to do something good with it.
Right.
But then we'll also give you a break from that, you know, just to keep things fresh and change it up with other things.
Right.
But then like you can get something like Into the Forest of the Firefly's Light, where it is just focused on the idea of don't we take human contact and touch for granted, and it just focuses on that. Just it. 40-minute film, you know, it does its thing. It's emotional kick, and it's just great. And but that's all it does. It doesn't do anything outside of that. It knows what it is, and it sticks to its guns.
And I think that knowing what it is really the key to differentiate why larger stories end up having a lot of problems. You'll notice when the vision changes for a story, a lot of people will leave it. There's a lot of stories like that started off really well, and the idea and vision of the story slowly changed as time went on, as money became more of a goal.
Right.
And things got a little bit off base from what they originally were meant to be.
Yeah.
In the same way as that Star Wars A New Hope was kind of a great example of where a short story didn't intend to have sequels and still spawned
just
a bunch
basic
of sequels.
hero's journey.
Yeah. It ended up getting to a point at some point in the prequels where visions started to change a little bit more. And maybe it was about selling toys a little bit more than it was about telling the best story. Who knows? We can't really get inside the mind of these creators, but you can tell when a story that's gone on for too long is only there because the vision changed a few times in the past, and that gave it enough fuel to keep going. I think one of the powerful things about shows that we love that aren't necessarily short or long, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, are like that because even though they did have meandering points in some way, they stuck to the vision of what that story was going to be. Yeah. And short stories aren't given the luxury to change their vision. They can't afford to. Because you know what a short story is when they change their vision. It's like, that was forgettable. It was just like a little blip in my ocean of memory, and it's just gone. Wait, did I see that?
Yeah.
No, gone.
And like, okay, because one of the things that, one of my favorite parts about stories is when you get to that ending. And the ending's just awesome. Maybe it rips your heart out, you know, or does whatever it does.
Yeah, it's like a culmination of just amazing positive emotion. You just go, yes!
There are so many different ways that you can do it, But the
Koi
idea,
koi.
exactly. But
Yep.
the idea that the ending is where, you put everything you have into this one final strike.
Yep.
And so many stories don't do that.
Yep.
Or they just
Yep.
that doesn't happen very often.
Dude.
Like the idea
So true.
that like this is why it's so hard for me to watch live action stuff now, because it's like, okay, do you want to watch this 24 episode 45 minute or 24 episode season with 45 minutes per episode? It's like, well, I could do that, or I could watch 4 one-core anime that all have like some very satisfying conclusion. Like, it's kind of an obvious choice.
Whereas the live action one just kind of baits you for the second
Right,
season.
exactly. Because they're wanting to be able to get that continuation so that they can, do an 8-season cop drama or whatever.
Yeah.
But but not that this is supposed to be a rant about long shows. The point is that short stories can be amazing, and they can be anything from, just like a 1-core, even 2-core anime, all the way down to just a poem or a
Music
picture
video.
or
Or
like,
what have you.
Like some of the best paintings out there are like they'll just be one image, but it'll ask so many questions. It'll infer so much.
Right.
It'll kind of tell a story.
I also want to posit a question to those of you that have a favorite show, and not just to not to attack it in any way, but with that favorite show of yours that's really long, like treasure that, because that's really good to have something like that. It's really awesome. But I would question how many like contributing factors to it are specific moments that are minor little small encapsulated stories sprinkled throughout the larger narrative,
right,
that actually are being kind of stretched apart over the entire narrative to kind of cover up those weaker moments.
Yeah, well, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be covering up weaker moments, but like when I might watch like a long story, like, okay, let's take Avatar: The Last Airbender, right?
For sure.
Love Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes.
We've watched it like over a dozen times. Like, I mean, come on,
love it.
If you watch our channel for any length of time, you'll know pretty quickly how much we love Airbender.
Exactly.
But if we were to think of like our favorite mini story from within Airbender,
right,
it might be like Zuko's redemption arc, right? Like, I mean, it's fantastic. But if you think about it, the amount of time that story actually, for that little aspect of the story, it's actually not that much time.
It's not.
And if you think about it, it wouldn't have had the same effect if they had done this. It would not have had the same effect. But they could have condensed it into something much shorter. Right. My Hero Academia, the second season with Todoroki, is a great example where they did something very much like that. Yes. They took the same kind of story, but then they just made it more tight. And when it's done
very
well,
tight.
It's so good.
Yes. It's almost a thing where if I was to write my own stories, I would start off by like sending out a bunch of short stories.
Sure.
Because one of the things I feel like people equate like kind of a grand story with being is the idea that, because it's big, it's amazing. And the idea that an ambitious story not executed well is equal to a semi-ambitious story executed, better. It's the idea that as the execution goes down, it's okay as long as the ambition and scope of the story is larger. And that's where I would say something like Lord of the Rings can have that scope and that ridiculously long-winded sometimes aspect of storytelling, but it makes it worth it on the standpoint that the stories themselves are all a bunch of short stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Or and I mean, maybe Lord of the Rings isn't the best example of that, but yeah. And because, like, okay, if you're doing a long story, that means there's more opportunities for things to go wrong. Yeah. Because nobody's perfect. Even if you absolutely know what you're doing, actually making the perfect story doesn't really work. You make the best story you can, and you just, keep your fingers crossed and hope it's, hope you really gave it your all.
Right.
When you keep it shorter, that basically means, hey, there's less space to go wrong. It's harder to do because you have to make sure that each part of that is really good. Right. But if it's only 12 episodes, there's a lot less likelihood that you'll have a bad episode than if you have 800 episodes.
Right. And for me in particular, I want to be proven wrong and find the long story that's just fantastic all the way through. And I know I'm not really going to find it, but the idea that one could be out there is good. Yeah. But when you've tasted the power of a really good short story,
you're just like,
there's a finesse to it that just feels like pure art, like
Right.
pure creative genius art. You feel like you're next to Rembrandt as he's painting his masterpieces or something, and you're just like,
Wax a bit more poetic, will you?
yeah, I guess so.
But it.
So yeah,
Yeah.
never underestimate the audience in particular, because
Yeah.
we notice things, and
Right.
when a story respects its audience by saying, we're not going to waste your time by wasting the story's time.
Mm-hmm.
I in particular, just Caleb's own opinion, I feel very valued as
Sure.
a story consumer.
And that also makes it so that it's easier to rewatch it and then pick up all those little things that maybe you missed the first time through.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, good stuff. Short stories,
yeah,
very fun.
fantastic.
All right, so into Q&A, we have Daw here asking what makes a good villain. This is a lot of villain questions recently, so this is, I think there are a couple people that ask stuff about villains, so we just condense it and have this question primarily about villains. It's a good question. I think it's what makes a good character, really.
Right.
Because a villain is just an antagonist.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good thing to remember, is that if you make a villain that's basically like a villainous person, it's easy to just go an object of villainy, ooh, evil, or someone that's a dirtbag. But you have to remember that this is a person or some kind of entity that has personality, motivations, goals, desires, likes, dislikes, weaknesses, strengths, all the things that make a character a character.
Yeah, because all the characters, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys or whatever, whether they don't conform to that black and white kind of model, you want your audience to care about them, not necessarily positively. They might vehemently want that person to die,
but they care that they die.
And that's really the important thing, because then you're getting them invested in the story, right?
Exactly.
And the best way to do that is when they actually feel like people. The worst villains aren't like, and by worst I mean the best villains, aren't the ones that are the evil for the sake of being evil, kill kittens and all that. It's the ones where it's that person that betrays you, and you're like, how could you do that, you bastard? Like, you're my friend. Like, we trusted you. And so, just think of them as an actual character.
It's kind of the same question we get. It's like, how do you make good female characters? Well, you make a good character.
Exactly. They're a character that is a female. A good villain is a character that happens to be
that person that does villainous things.
That is working against the protagonist.
So that's it. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Nihar Nandan asks, what is Jacob's book about? I mean, what genre?
It is a sci-fi sort of coming-of-age story.
Yeah.
The main themes are morality / like duty and loyalty, and then family. Yeah,
it's very cool.
It is.
All right. Czar Project asks, if either of you would choose between the following, which is it and why? A, being able to teleport yourself anywhere. B, being able to teleport other things other than yourself.
Well,
I think we've had a similar question like
we
this.
might have, actually.
Yeah.
My main question to this question is, if you teleport yourself, but you can't teleport other things, does that mean you can't teleport the clothes you're wearing? Because that could be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I feel like teleporting other things would be more valuable.
Yeah, because then you can just bring stuff to you.
Yeah.
Although being able to travel with teleporting would be pretty cool.
It would be kind of cool, but I feel like if I could bring other things to me or take other things away,
that would end up being more useful overall.
It'd be more useful, yeah.
All right,
Little Duck asks, what are some tips for naming places and things in a high fantasy setting? This is something that drives me crazy.
It drives everyone crazy.
It drives everyone crazy, but I'll tell you, one of the weirdest things about our writing kind of relationship is Jacob can write dialogue. It's one of the things that I cannot do. It's so hard. But no, really, it's hard. But it is naming hard. Things. Oh,
he goes crazy.
I have so much fun naming things.
He'll come up with like 40 names for like characters and stuff in like 5 minutes, and they all sound like characters that would be interesting.
Okay, so here's one of the things that I'd say is very, very easy to remember, is that there are an infinite number of real names that already exist to choose from. So go look up just names that start with that letter that you want to use. Like, I'm being very basic here, but you can just start at the letter H and you would take weeks going through names that start with the letter H.
That's true. You don't have to have it be Tolkien where, it's like Fëanor, Fingolfin, Fëanor, and Finwë, and all that, where...
But in a high fantasy setting in particular, one of the things that I think is really good to do is you have an assortment of names that communicate the feeling of the character that you want it to be. So if you have that villainous type character that's like, you want them to feel a little bit kind of edgy around them, give them a name that's not necessarily like difficult to pronounce, but that name that has some R's in it. It has some some hard sound to it. And
yeah, that it wouldn't really make sense if like Éowyn's name was Sauron and Sauron's name was Éowyn.
Right, you can feel the warmth of Éowyn, and Sauron just feels like this warmongering thing that just conquers and devours.
He is a bad guy.
Yeah. So one of the things you can do is say the names out loud and just figure out how it makes you feel. I would say that there are no bad names for a high fantasy setting.
Sure.
But I would say unless you're going to be a linguist like Tolkien and develop your own language, I would say
keep it simple.
Try to avoid the whole high fantasy specific thing and keep it simple.
And if you do that, keep the syllables fairly low. Mm-hmm. A 4-syllable name, even if it sounds really cool, isn't going to stick in the person's mind very well. Unless, if you do something like that, try to have like a shorter nickname.
What was that name that I came up with when I was really bad at naming things, like Dunamisticos or something like that?
Oh yeah,
it was like this very.
You just took like 2 Latin words and mashed them together.
I took 2 Latin words and mashed them together. Yeah. Don't do that. Like, taking a name straight from history sometimes is actually very good idea, especially when you're going for a specific vibe. Like, say you're going for a Nordic cultural vibe, then you can use old names from history. And that. Yeah. So there you go. Favorite character class, WA, for D&D.
Well, Caleb doesn't really play D&D.
I don't really play D&D, but I think I would be more of a fan of anything involving like ranged, like a ranger or something.
Sure, yeah, like a ranger or potentially well, not really as much a rogue. Okay, don't laugh. My favorite's the paladin. Now, paladins get a lot of crap because usually people don't get very creative with actually making the character. But the idea of the paladin, putting aside the fact that they wear armor, which is something I'm very fond of.
Right.
But they're just like pretty like badass and cool.
Okay.
But, usually they end up getting stereotypes to the vanilla, bland, lawful good. Which is unfortunate because if you think about it, paladins have some of the strongest convictions of any of the classes, or at least they're supposed to. So, yeah.
Okay, so next question from WA. Would you rather go to UA or Beacon?
You don't get to meet the main cast. You have a quirk or semblance, but no fall of Beacon. I'd say it's pretty obvious, right?
I don't know. I'm completely torn. I have no idea.
Well, I'd say Beacon just because in both you get a quirk or semblance, which are basically the same thing, but at Beacon, you get a weapon.
Oh,
like,
see, I don't know.
You get a transforming weapon, and you can have it be kind of whatever you want.
See, here's the thing. If I get to go to UA, that means I am one of the best of the best. Even if I'm in the business course or the support course or the general studies course,
sure,
I am one of the greats.
Well, same if you go to Beacon. I mean, everyone there is pretty badass.
Yeah, that's true. But I think I would go to UA. I feel like the threat of dying to monsters who feed off of a negative emotion.
Okay, fine.
Is enough for me to go. I wouldn't want to be in that world.
Because that involves being in that world. Okay, sure.
I'm not saying your idea is bad. You do get a weapon.
No, I wouldn't build even a weapon. I just build armor.
All right, next, Slendernesia. What are your favorite soundtracks from anime or TV shows? And was there a scene you thought it was crucial in setting the tone for this?
First off, I just want to say, why is it that anime, as far as soundtracks go, tend to just kick the pants off of, like, anything in the West?
Because I feel like the Western shows don't actually care as much
about
the soundtrack.
And maybe they just, like, use songs that have already been made by, like, artists or something.
Right. It's not about creating necessarily the soundtrack for a TV show. That's more of a big spectacle movie thing.
Yeah. More of something like Disney would do.
To be fair, there are a lot of good soundtracks for shows in the West and stuff. It's just that, Jacob, you don't actually watch too many Western shows.
Well, no. And, usually it'd be for, like, movies or something. Like,
You
like
generally
Disney.
watch movies. You don't watch live action
Right,
TV shows.
Exactly. But they
Yeah.
don't tend to have great music.
No, they can.
They can.
You just don't watch them. So that's,
Yeah.
I would say that our favorite soundtracks from anime is basically anything with Hiroyuki Sawano.
Yeah.
And
Specifically Crone for me. I absolutely love that song.
Yeah.
Oh, also, Lost My Pieces from Toradora.
It's very good.
Lost My Pieces from Toradora is absolutely amazing. And like the entire Your Lie in April soundtrack.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that, but
You will soon, hopefully.
I would say, even though the show itself isn't necessarily technically anime to some people, I feel like Jacob's appreciation, my appreciation of it is maybe not as much as his, but Jeff and Casey Williams' stuff with Ruby is worth noting about.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's
The
more
Ruby
of anything,
soundtrack
I
is
just love to
amazing.
give Ruby a shout out for anything I can, but they deserve it on the music front.
They really do.
Especially with when you remember where they came from in Volume 1 to seeing where they're coming out with music now. There are songs that come out still, recently that are just blowing my mind. Like
This
Home,
Life Is Mine.
This Life Is Mine.
Yeah.
There's songs, from, previous stuff like Cold, where it's just, just tears your heart out. It's so good. And there's Red Like Roses Part 2.
Or even the more underrated things like Wings.
Yeah, exactly. So good stuff. I would say that I don't know too much about the specific soundtracks in anime to be able to call them out by name. But
yeah.
Yeah.
I tend to get them into those things a bit more.
But the second part of the question I didn't fully understand. Was there a scene you thought it was crucial in setting the tone for with a specific soundtrack?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Jacob, go for it. You get this question. I don't have an answer.
Okay. First off, Cold for Ruby Volume 3. That was fantastically setting it up in the credits. But Lost My Pieces.
Yeah.
In the spoiler alert, in episode 19, when a character has an epiphany.
Yes.
They time the epiphany with the music very well, and they make a habit of doing that actually throughout the show. But this is like the climax of all of that, and it is absolutely amazing. And because they did such a good job of setting the tone with the song, that's one of the main reasons that I like the song so much. Because I remember after watching it, the show just the first time when I hadn't seen it a zillion times and could remember all the different parts of it,
right?
I would just listen to the song and it would drive me to tears because it would remind me of all the emotions throughout the show when I didn't really remember the show very well.
That's what it's absolutely meant to do, and it does it so well. Peter Haven asks, anyway, what do you guys think about inherited power plot in anime? I feel it is way too overused. Just name a few examples you have seen. Ruby, Avatar, MHA. While I love these shows, I can't help and feel like, oh god, not this again whenever I watch an anime with this plot point. I think that's a really good potential podcast idea in the future. Is the idea of there are too many shows where the power is this thing that the hero gets through some kind of special means. The inherited part is actually a little bit interesting because Avatar's power being inherited is completely different from the power that Midoriya gets through...
completely different?
No, because it's an active thing that he gets based on his efforts.
Okay, that
Aang
is true.
is fatalistic. His is given to him by the destiny of the universe. He has no choice in the matter.
Yeah, same kind of thing with something like Ruby. Yeah.
Same thing with something like Ruby. I feel like it's where something like Star Wars is different as well because Luke inherits the Force through his father. But the idea is we don't know why he has the Force. He just knows that he has the call to action, and if he goes on the call to action, he will be able to explore the Force.
Right.
But if he doesn't choose it, he won't ever really experience it. And that's where I think the main choice is if the character of the main character, the hero or whatever, is forced along the path because they inherited this power, then I think that's a weaker form of storytelling.
It reduces the sense of agency for the main character, which is something that's really important in whatever kind of story you have.
Right.
And one of the other things I would say is that for those inherited powers, in the hero's journey or whatever, especially if you have any kind of power system, whether it's magic or, you're talking about anime or
For
something,
sure.
and the person has to, like, grow and develop their abilities, the inherited power is basically a way to bypass that. I like the idea of it because you can skip over a lot of the times where they're just focusing on, I must get stronger, rather than growing as a person along in parallel with that.
Yes.
But yeah, it is something where it can cause the main character to have maybe less of a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunate, because struggles are what really make you, identify and empathize with characters. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that Star Wars in particular is my example of the inherited power done right. One of the things that's also done in particular with the inherited power in a lot of these stories is there's a massive info dump about this inherited thing and the weight of it and all of this bit
which removes the sense of mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I would say, the main thing that Star Wars did that's different, even though it was an inherited power, since they didn't introduce it like that, other than maybe Obi-Wan saying like, your father was a Jedi Knight, it was just this thing, and he had to discover it.
Yes.
Amazing.
And it came through the most tropey of ways for nowadays, because it was setting the pace for the hero's journey in the science fantasy setting.
Yeah.
But something like Avatar, one of my favorite things about that was they dealt with the whole idea of the weight of this burden put on a 12-year-old kid to save the world, and the kid runs away. And because of that, his inherited power actually ends up being a thing that saves his life, so that he ends up being able to use his power in a sense where he's detached, which is actually a very dark point of the story.
Yeah.
To where his weight of responsibility isn't personal, it's impersonal. He has no, except for his friends, he has no real ties to it.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing I think they bring up in MHA. I think Ruby is a little bit behind on some of those things in particular, because actually the inherited power
was just introduced.
So I would say in Ruby, it's okay in that it's not the main focus of the story.
Right.
Ruby as a character drives the story by her desire to do good things, not in desire to use her power or even to grow her power.
Heck, they just had an episode where they do training, and her MacGuffin power is not
even
at all
brought up,
even mentioned. Which is a little bit confusing, but they did that.
It's different.
It's different.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, you know what? We're not going to focus that on that right now.
I think that's a good point also to bring up with shows that we watched a long time ago, like Bleach in particular. The idea that it wasn't inherited, but he basically did. It was in that she kind of just sticks the sword. And then he just suddenly gets all the powers along with those other things that were kind of there and inherited.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that. I thought that was a great way to do it, because it still comes with the decision, right?
Yes, the decision was there.
But then it's like, your dad was a this, your mom was a this, and
and suddenly you're mounding up a whole pile of inherited stuff.
Exactly.
Anything that removes the sense of anything removes not the sense of it, just the agency of the main character driving the story
is probably a bad thing.
Generally a bad thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would say Jacob and I generally just detest in a way is reactive main characters.
And not to say that reactive main characters can't be done well, but it's the idea that not just reactive main characters, but main characters that don't have desire. Right. Because that's when their reactionariness is usually the biggest problem.
Right. It's where someone like Aragorn is not the true main character of Lord of the Rings, and he's not given a sword in the beginning of his journey to go and do the thing to save the hobbits. If anything, he's more of asked to serve. And then at the end of the story, this is of course the movie version, not the book version.
In the books, he's just like,
"I'll
run."
Right?
Yeah,
because he's not a reluctant hero; he's a proactive hero.
Yeah.
But by giving him the sword at the end, it's saying, "All right, now that you have made these choices, you are ready for the inherited power that you can take to finalize your story."
And even then, it wasn't saying you're now ready. It's saying, "Will you please take the inherited power?"
Right? Are you ready to take it? Are you ready to bear this burden?
And then it ended up being his decision.
Yes.
To take it up.
But yes, I'm with you in that if I see another just boring male protagonist that gets the sword from their father and says, "You must now slay the archdemon."
Unless it's parody.
Unless it's a parody. Yeah, parody can solve the whole thing. There you go. All right, so Flower Dance asks pet peeves for antagonists. Let's do like one each.
Yeah.
Monologuing.
Oh, sure.
That's one of my pet peeves. Yeah.
Plans that wouldn't get past a team of 5-year-olds. Every villain needs a team. Every villain needs a classroom of 5-year-old analysts to just look at what they're doing and say,
"Thank you.
Why not do this?"
I know what you're referring to as well. Oh my gosh. Okay, great question. Next one, pet peeves for protagonists.
We just went over
that. Yeah, I would say that to build off of that, it's the protagonist that just looks like they don't really care if they're there or not. Like they'd be like, "I could go get some restaurant food over there, or I could go save the princess from the dragon. Whatever is convenient right now."
And here's the thing. A lot of times that stems from basically the characters being made to be easier to insert yourself into, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Not.
That is not.
It's not.
But the problem with that is that the best way to do that sort of self-insert type thing is when you're wanting there to be something communicated that's sort of transcendent or universal.
Right.
Something that anyone would be able to relate to just because of the nature of the thing that's happening.
Absolutely.
And then you can have the character communicate that sense of wonder or fear or whatever.
So what's your pet peeve? About protagonists.
It's basically that.
Basically that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just that.
So last question, what are some of your favorite flaws in protagonists? It's actually interesting. I would say that the protagonist's main flaw is one of the most powerful things to have for moving a story along in a proactive way by the protagonist. And one of the things you can do is you have a protagonist that makes mistakes. And one of the things that you can do as a very, very nice way to have the mistakes be with their successes is you have them have successes that lead to natural consequences. So the idea that the protagonist doesn't think things through after the initial bit of success is a great flaw. The idea that they're maybe a little bit proud, they're maybe a little bit too overconfident to where they go and they defeat the bad guy from, harassing this village, but then, something ends up going, along the way to where they're a little bit short-sighted. I think that's more of the thing where you say, I know at some point this person's going to be a wise individual because they're going to get really experienced with life in general. But they need to make some mistakes here and there. I would say having a little bit too much overconfidence and a little bit of pride. Not the kind of snooty pride where you don't listen to other people, but just overconfident and maybe a little bit short-sighted.
Okay.
Those are some of my favorite flaws.
For my favorite flaws, I would say yes. And basically that my favorite thing about flaws is not necessarily what the specific flaw is itself, but rather how the protagonist deals with the flaws.
Okay. That's a cheating answer.
It is a cheating answer. I'll bring up a specific example though.
Oh.
All right. ReZero.
Oh,
okay. There's a scene.
You didn't.
Yeah. All right. So
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. Basically, his flaw that he basically sees Emilia as this heroine that he must win over.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
And everything that he does is just for his own selfish reasons, not because he actually wants to help people.
Right.
And if you think about that as a flaw, that's not a fun flaw to watch.
No, it's
like
not.
if you think about it, right? That doesn't sound like it makes for a particularly interesting character. But it's how you see them dealing with that. It's that moment when you see Subaru come to the realization
that he's selfish.
Like that he's selfish,
really selfish.
and Emilia's just looking at him like he's crazy. And then of course later when he breaks down, that's what gets me excited about character flaws. It's when it's that coming to grips with it. It's not the flaw itself.
That's cheating, but yeah, it's a great answer.
It kind of is.
Yeah, I was just like, what's those flaws that I really like that are in a lot of my stories, my protagonist? Yeah, those ones, yeah. And you're just like, I'm gonna do the meta answer. Like, well, fine. So smart and stuff. But that's I would say that too. That's a great thing. It's also kind of a thing, because I'm gonna cheat in here and add a second answer. Contradictory actions where their internal state is in conflict with their external state.
Right.
So you can tell that they are not fully grown and matured yet, and that they don't fully understand themselves. So they end up doing things that conflict with what they actually seem to believe. And that has to lead towards something, a realization, like you're talking about, that they are at odds with themselves. And that's the whole Joseph Campbell, man versus man, hero versus hero kind of thing, where it's not another person, it's more of, internal conflict.
If you think about it this way, all right, this is going to be a stupid diagram, but all right, let's say you have a or something about a character that's pulling them in one way.
Right.
And then you have something that pulls them in another way. That's a contradiction. Now, no contradictions, one-dimensional. Multiple contradictions, hey, they're starting to get two-dimensional. But what if you made another contradiction on top of that? Right. The idea that the more contradictions, the better. Because contradictions communicate more than just saying the same thing twice.
Right.
So,
good stuff, Jacob.
Well, thank you.
Well said. I don't think that was a dumb diagram at all.
Well, hopefully you guys like it.
Hopefully. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking around at the end of our podcast. We'll see y'all later. But until then, Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you all next time.